1 week season.
1 week season, fam. Welcome back. Week 4, DFS Fanduel Labs. I am Mike Johnson, your host. M Johnson 86, as I am known in the DFS and best ball streets. Excited to be with you here for a 4th week. Crazy to think we are just about a quarter of the way through the NFL season already. Things fly by here, but we will waste no time today. I'm going to bring in my esteemed colleague, Mr. Maximus, back from the road, back from the luxurious lifestyle. Last week, it sounds like you were able to have a nice week on FanDuel, be profitable despite, just a man of the people, fighting off the groupies to find a way to DFS profit. Good stuff. You want to share with us how your week went?
Sure. Yeah, back home from the road. It was a fun tour. But yeah, I was in that the usual tournament that we've been covering so far this season. And 3 of my 5 teams placed. My best team was 15th out of 524. I think it was a score of around 180 and change. A lot of high scores, especially for FanDuel this past week. But yeah, I was really happy with the process. 2 of my 3 weeks have been profitable so far this season. So, there's peaks and valleys, ebbs and flows, as we all know throughout the season. But you'll definitely take the good weeks when you get them, and you hope for that 1 or 2 weeks that are month, year, or life changing, eventually. So.
Yeah, exactly. Very good. Yeah, 2 out of 3 profitable weeks. And I think that's the thing. Sometimes people, they get so focused on those huge payouts, and they forget that just a profitable week, or even like a break-even week, is nothing to sneeze at in DFS. It's a competitive field. There's a lot going on. The way that the payout structures are, especially if you're in certain contests, like breaking even is a win a lot of times. So, the way I look at it is, if you're able to break even, assuming you play the same each week, which is kind of what I would recommend, as far as bankroll and whatnot, is, to play at a level where you can sustain it, where you can play it every week, and just basically viewing it as like a break even week means next week I'm playing for free. You don't have to deposit, you don't have to dig into your bankroll at all. So yeah, it's, and that's, you kind of have to, and JM's talked a lot about that too, is you have to be willing to be sustainable, or to be able to win, you've got to play for first. But in order to play for first, you got to be willing to lose. You got to be willing to make some choices that, maybe a little uncomfortable from time to time. So with that said, we'll dive into your lineup from this week. You were sharing it with me. We talked a little bit about it, but why don't you take me through it again? This is for that same contest, that 5 max $65 contest on FanDuel. Go ahead, share with us, your thoughts on this roster and how it came together.
Definitely. At first looking at it, for a 500 person type tournament, on the face of it, it may have seemed a little on the thin side with what I'm stacking, but a lot of value opened up with the unfortunate injury of one of the main receivers on the Chargers in this case. But yeah, I have Justin Herbert double stacked with Quentin Johnston and Donald Parham. Quentin Johnston's first round draft pick, definitely a stretch the field type player, deep threat. And he's going to be more involved now with Mike Williams out. And then Donald Parham, amazingly, has the 3rd most red zone targets of any tight end through 3 weeks. So, he is kind of a multi-tight end split with Everett, but he's definitely been the red zone guy. And with his size, I could see why they're allocating him to that, which is good for touchdown purposes, which is what you're gunning for on FanDuel. So I have a Herbert, Johnston, Parham stack in this case. Running it back, with, I believe, Devontae Adams.
Yep.
If you scroll down, yeah, a little more. Devontae goes without saying, although probably should watch the news on Garoppolo. I don't know the latest with his with the concussion protocol with him, but regardless, Adams is the rightful bring back. You could also
okay with the 20 targets on Sunday night.
Yeah, right. Yeah, not bad. And then I feel once again now, I think there's a lot of directions regarding individual team totals, especially in the late window, even though there's only 3 games this week. But clearly, again, you have a head and shoulders game environment, and it usually involves the Miami Dolphins. But in this case, it's the Dolphins and the Bills. So I figured I wanted to get some exposure to that game. In this case, I have Mostert, Jalen Waddle. I think the latest news with Waddle is that he practiced in full on Wednesday. So it looks like barring any setbacks, he'll be good to go for Sunday. And then a run back of Gabe Davis there. And then I have Zach Moss, who's quietly, I don't know how under the radar he is, but he's just been crushing this year for Indy. That's a pick'em game at the moment, I think, but he is a home running back. Richardson will probably be back, but I like his price and I like his production so far this year. You see, he fits the mold of the pricing within this lineup. And then I ended here with the Bengals defense, which, the talk's been on the offense underperforming, but the defense has actually been pretty good, I feel, this year. And they are on the road, but they're playing Tennessee, which is relatively a non-threatening, non-explosive offense per se. But what I do like about this lineup in the realm of making 5 teams is you can do a lot of mixing and matching with these teams and game environments. So, for instance, you could adjust this team and take Raheem Mostert and Waddle out, put in a Kane and Tyreek Hill, and then you would just have to switch up your defense, and then you kind of keep the other pieces. Or you could even do Herbert, take out Quentin Johnston, put in Josh Palmer. Maybe you switch Devontae Adams for Jacoby Myers, who's back. And that would be another route you can take. So I kind of like it's kind of like a block where I got the game environments that I'm interested in. And with making 5 teams, you can mix and match different players in these game environments that, as fate would have it, seem to work out pricing wise to really expand on the initial build that we started with here.
Right. Yeah. And, within the realm of this particular contest, and it makes a lot of sense where you're playing this 5 max contest. So if you feel really good about a couple specific situations, but so you've got the Raiders, for instance, you've got Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, and Josh Jacobs. Those 3 account for I think it's 88% of the touches last week on Sunday night. It's so concentrated. But if you think the Chargers are going to win, it might, we don't necessarily know which Raider for sure is going to blow up or is going to have that biggest game. But you can say with a great deal of confidence, I think one of them is going to have a very, very strong game. It's basically going to come down to, who the touchdowns flow through. And Adams and Myers each have a 2-touchdown game. Jacobs hasn't scored a touchdown yet this year, which, you'd think that's going to change at some point. And JM, he used to, a few years back on OWS, we had an always one Vikings rule because it was especially on DraftKings between Dalvin, Adam Thielen, and Jefferson. Before that, it was Diggs instead of Jefferson. Every week, one of them was scoring 25 to 30 points. So it's definitely we target game environments. We talk about that so much on 1 week season, specific game environments and how we can kind of try to build differently around them. You talked about that Miami Buffalo game. I think that most lineups that want to build around this game, if they have 3 guys from this game, they're probably going to have a quarterback, so they're probably going to have Josh Allen most likely or Tua. So it's definitely like, and we just saw it last week, JM in his Winner Circle pod on Tuesday, I think it came out yesterday, but was talking about how we can build around the expected those. You don't have to just avoid those games where maybe there's going to be a lot of high ownership, or it's like they're expected to produce well for a reason. So you don't have to just straight up avoid them. You can play them differently. So really an interesting way, to build around that. And then I'm going to bring back to our initial roster. I know you had some late swap thoughts on this lineup as well. So I wanted to give you a chance to dive into that.
Quick note, too, on the Raiders side of the ball for that Chargers stack. So far, the Chargers are 27th in DVOA against the pass, and they're 32nd, dead last in the league in yards allowed per pass. So that's, pretty telling especially for Adams or Myers. Mm-hmm. But also to your point, Jacobs, he's always a powder keg waiting to explode at any, and then on any given week as well. And speaking of JM and OWS, some of these high profile focused players in the offense, 1 out of every 4 weeks, historically, they're going to put up a tournament worthy score. And that hasn't happened for Jacobs yet on the other side of that thought. So, but
yeah. And that's the thing. You don't necessarily, I brought up that concentrated aspect, but like even at that, you don't need to feel like you've got to account for every single one of them, because then it gets into you're spreading yourself so thin. So yeah, it just like you're picking your spot and you're kind of concentrating it there, but you're expanding upon that one. That the Quentin Johnston thing. Sorry, I'm cutting in on you here, or not Johnston. The Donald Parham situation is that's like wild how he's got through 3 games. He's got 7 targets and 3 touchdowns. Like it's wild because there was actually a OWS member in the Inner Circle chat on that thread on Discord. It was last like Thursday or Friday, was talking about Parham and was basically saying he liked him because of his role. And like, it looks like that type of like in that red zone area, he's so hard to guard is, just with his frame, with Herbert's accuracy, with the other weapons they have, and was saying he really liked him. I kind of was like, well, first of all, I love Donald Parham. He was on the roster week 17 2 years ago, my best roster ever, won like $200K. And so I have nothing against him, and I've had him in like dynasty leagues for years. But I was like, well, he's got 5 targets and he's got 1 touchdown. But I mean, it looks like they're going to just keep using him there.
My concern is definitely the regression. He's already got 3 touchdowns, so that's my intrepidation. But the price at 4,900, it just kind of fits.
So this is where having like an open mind is so important at this. It's funny because in the past, or like a week ago, one of my friends who they don't really do DFS, they just always text me about. It's actually my wife's friend's husband. And he texts me all these fantasy football questions all the time. And some of them are like start sit. And I'm like, dude, I'm, check some rankings, like, but he inquires about my DFS stuff. He's like, well, he's like, if you want anything big this year, because, usually like when I win something, then my wife tells his wife, and then he's like, hey, what, show me the lineup. So he's like, have you hit anything big? I'm like, no, not yet, whatever. And he's like, well, what traditionally is like your best time? Do you have like a time that's best? And it's ironic because looking historically, weeks like 4 to 7, especially 4 to 10 in general, but 4 to 10 specifically are like the sweet spot kind of for me. And The reason I attribute it to this, sorry for this long monologue off of Donald Parham, but he is a specific situation where the natural inclination is like there's levels to this. There's locating him as like, okay, a guy who could score. Then there's the leveling where people think, okay, he's bound to regress, which is admittedly kind of where I was going with it last week, but also rewatching that game and knowing what I've thought about Parham for 2 or 3 years as a player. He's had setbacks due to injuries. Like, I see it as that. I don't think that red zone role is going to regress really, especially with the loss of Mike Williams. You know, you think of it from the standpoint of how like the Packers basically used to use Devontae Adams as like a goal line back. They would just like scheme these like 2-yard passes to him and he'd have like 16, 17 touchdowns. Like, I think it's in play for Parham to lead the NFL in touchdowns just because when they get down there, you know, Joshua Kelly hasn't been super effective the last couple of weeks. Austin Eckler, when he comes back, he's coming off an injury. Do they want to just pound him into the, like, you got a dude who's 6'8" and has arms for days, and you got a super accurate quarterback. Why wouldn't you just keep like peppering him? And then he becomes like the focal point that defenses are putting their attention on. And that's opening up these other things instead of, you know, so I think there's actually room for his role to grow, to stay and hold and maybe even grow, because when you look at his athleticism and stuff, there's a need now. Like, Quentin Johnston's a first-round rookie wide receiver, but he's been playing like 20% of the snaps. So, like, these teams want to get that guy on the field. So, and I think he's like a good play here, and he's still cheap because he's going to play a lot now. But for Parham, like, they might get him more involved in other parts of the field. They might, you know, what if they start using his athleticism and size as like a seam stretcher? You know, he gets a couple 20-yard receptions, you know, to go with his red zone role. So, you know, that was, you know, I digressed a little bit there and got off topic, but I think that this is that time of year where sometimes people assume that things are going to regress to what their original assumption was on a player or situation. Or they're like, well, I missed on this guy when he was super cheap and he hit, so now it's too late. But really, like, it could still be on the way up. So yeah, really interesting situation there. And just the psychology of that across like all players. When we're in week 4, we've got 3 weeks of data, you know, being able to, I guess, get in the minds of the coaches. Because things might not regress because coaches are also evaluating what's happened and they're realigning how they're going to approach things. So if a guy is done really well through the first 2 or 3 weeks on limited opportunity, that opportunity might grow. So,
and to put the cherry on top of your 2 points, ironically, I'm just looking at Gerald Everett. He has an illness, so he's actually sick at the moment, which could even make it more relevant. And Justin Herbert's his quarterback. So to your point, having a quarterback like Herbert, who I think is just revving up, he just looks sensational right now. Yeah. Those factors will keep Parham relevant.
Playing the best football of his career. You know, Kellen Moore is, I think, is really opening him up and good things ahead. So yeah, do you want to dive in a bit to like the late swap stuff we were talking about with this roster? So
yes, definitely.
In the early window, you've got Mostert, Zach Moss, Jalen Waddle, Gabe Davis, and the Bengals defense. So if you wanted, we've talked about late swap on past weeks. If you wanted, you've got these 4 o'clock guys. And, you know, there's different ways we could use those 4 spots. So what was one of the other ways that you had talked about?
Absolutely. You got to account for the 49ers. They have a 29-point individual implied team total. Brock Purdy is at a really good price right now. You could easily swap out Herbert for Purdy. You can add him with Ayuk and Kittle, or Debo and Kittle. Got to watch their injury statuses. I think Ayuk is kind of back on track not sure about Debo yet, but you could easily kind of do a double stack with Purdy, and then maybe a run back of Marquise Brown, who I think is priced at 6,000. Really good price on him still. He's probably one of the few concentrated pieces for the 49ers. I'm sorry, for the Cardinals. And
So
the 49ers definitely a little bit of a funnel toward the pass this year so far. And Joshua Dobbs has actually played, I think, much better than people expected him to. So it's another situation that you could kind of switch around. Like maybe you're
So
1
you'd
o'clock player. Go ahead.
you'd have to, so for a late swap approach here, so if you're wanted to late swap this onto the Niners, so you gotta choose someone here. You're gonna end up having to choose between Ayuk and Kittle. So like what you could do is because otherwise you're gonna be 200 short. But what you could do is we talked about that Raiders situation. So you could have a Purdy with Kittle, Marquise Brown bring back with Myers filling out that last spot to take, to account for that Raiders situation. And that is, the splits for George Kittle when Debo is out are really, really strong. And this is a situation, sorry to hijack you here, but it's a situation with the Niners where, Debo missed practice on Wednesday. Ayuk was limited. It sounds like Debo, I wouldn't be surprised if he played, but also they're at home against the Cardinals. Like I could see it being he plays, but how involved do they really want him? If they get up 17-3, they're not going to force him the ball like they were last Thursday when Ayuk was out. So those, those with or without Debo stats, I think are in play either way. And I think we might not get information on Debo until after the early games have locked. So could be a lot of extra value in going with this San Francisco route that you're talking about here.
And then one other thought, the way the team was, you had $200 that you're in the minus. My thought was, so we're moving off the Chargers offense to the Niners offense. You could plug in the Chargers defense at $200 less, and then you could keep that team the way it was, how I was initially explaining it when we were kind of switching over to the 49ers. So so you're moving off the Chargers offense. The Raiders may not have Garoppolo. They may have, one of their backup. It's in Los Angeles. Well, it's in Chargers home. And so that's another way to do it. And then I think 3,900. So I think that would get you to.
Yep. You just have to do one of two things. You'd either have to start with the Chargers or a different 3,900 or less 4 p.m. Defense, or you could just build both rosters within your roster block, of those 5 rosters you're building.
With 5 teams. Yep.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And or if you were only doing one, if you were, would be an option. Like if you're not totally married to that Bengals defense, you could start with a different 3,900 defense or less. So really any of them, any cheap late defense. Mm-hmm. And let's say you started with the Patriots. Again, this is just, an exercise. So you could start with the Patriots defense, and now you have the option of how do you want to play this late game? Do you want to play this Purdy, Ayuk, Kittle, Marquise Brown? And you have that option to be built like it, but it's also, or I guess you could do, Chargers. So
a defense.
Say we built like this to start. You would have the option to switch to the Herbert build, and you can just find a different defense. You can just go to, I guess it would probably have to be the Patriots among the late swap defenses. So like that would be a build. You have that core of Mostert, Waddle, Zach Moss, and Gabe Davis. So you have that core 4 players, but then you have 2 different. So let's say you have this lineup. You can do And then Deebo Samuel news comes out, 45 minutes before he's going to play. He's full go, then, oh, shoot, maybe I don't want to have this build. Maybe I don't, or maybe you've totally hit the nuts. And when push comes to shove, you're more confident in the Chargers. And this initial core has hit the nuts. Well, you could swap onto that Chargers if that's the one you're more confident in. So, just a lot of optionality. And we've kind of talked about this on past weeks is the late swap. I guess having a plan ahead of time is the most critical thing instead of just 15 minutes before lock going through and like randomly clicking which guys are available. Because that's the other thing with Fanduel. It doesn't, when you go to late swap, it doesn't like remove the guys who have already played. So you got to scroll through everybody.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't have, which is kind of annoying, but it's also like, to me, it's an edge because it makes it more difficult, which makes it so that less people do it. So I'm willing to deal with those user interface type things when they benefit me by other people not utilizing it.
I also like, again, and I had a lot of them last week. I know, and they were only 1% owned. I saw in the tournament I was in, the Texans defense. They've really been overachieving this year. And I think I had spoken last week how for some reason they've been really good against Trevor Lawrence historically in the last couple of years that they've played him. Now, obviously the Bills were the nuts defense last week, but they're still priced so cheap. If you wanted to go 1 o'clock on defense, Pittsburgh's still trying to find themselves, I think, and the Texans defense has definitely been overachieving, I think, when anybody expected out of them.
Yeah, and I'm glad you touched on that because they stood out to me as well. And the interesting thing to me is, so the Steelers have played 3 games, right? Okay, I'll pull up. I had them up just a second ago. They've played 3 games. The last 2 games, they played the Raiders defense, who like Pittsburgh did fine against them. The week before that, Cleveland's defense, which is very good defense, really shut them down. They only won that game because Watson had the 2 turnovers leading to defensive scores. But then in week 1, they played the 49ers defense, and they couldn't move the ball at all. Like they were completely stifled. Now, granted, the 49ers have better personnel than the Texans, but who is the Houston Texans head coach?
Exactly. 49ers.
The former defensive coordinator for the 49ers. So obviously, philosophically, like going to line up exactly, going to be able to identify the calls, the philosophy, the game plan, exactly what they did against the Steelers team. And the Steelers are now without Deontay Johnson. Allen Robinson missed practice. Najee Harris hasn't looked good. So granted, they don't have the same personnel as the 49ers, but for a cheap defense that's going to be sub 5%, when we literally saw the exact same defense philosophically just absolutely destroy them 3 weeks ago. Like those are the types of things that you can learn from the first few weeks. And if you can kind of connect the dots, and that's where, not to, shameless self-promotion here, but at 1 week season, like we do the team previews in the off season with our best ball product. We dig into all the coaching changes, philosophically, how teams are going to look, how they're going to match up, what their style will be, where did this coach come from? Those types of things are so valuable when you get to this point in the season because you can make those connections. So a little shameless self-promotion there, but it's those little connections that can make a big difference.
Well, to elaborate on your point, it's funny you would bring up team previews. In preparation for me constructing on the Dolphins-Bills game, I actually reread the team previews of both teams. And even this morning before we were setting up here, it kind of, a lot of talk about Shakir, who's so cheap right now in that Bills offense as far as how they use him. And it was interesting to read the team previews again because it's giving me new thoughts for, different teams to maybe play around with the Josh Allen stack. Maybe you could actually stack Allen with Shakir and Dalton Kincaid, who they're using as a wide receiver pretty much, whereas Dawson Knox is more traditional tight end usage. And I think they're just going to keep blossoming, those two guys, as they work them more into the offensive scheme. And who knows, it could happen this week, and they'll probably need them this week because of the Dolphins' firepower, potentially. So, yeah, but I got all that from rereading the team previews on OWS, guys. Non-shameless plug. Definitely the team previews, definitely read them and reread them if or when you have the time to. So,
yeah, absolutely. All right. I guess anything else you want to add with these builds, with this roster? Any other thoughts for this week before we go?
I think that's it for now. We got to see how some injury news shakes out, and obviously late news, and make sure we know who's in and who's out. But overall, I'm very excited. Looking forward to this week, especially the NFL Edge write-ups on OWS. And you're also, guys, I'll say it for him always, the FanDuel Focus write-up from Mike is always golden. I always want to make sure that I notice that before I finalize my teams before kickoff. And he has a FanDuel course as well that you can purchase on the OWS site. So that's steered, specifically for FanDuel. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And, I hope you have a great week as well, of course.
Very good. Thank you, as always, Maximus. Thank you, OWS fam, for joining us. Anyone new, go check out the site, oneweekseason.com. Get a OWS free membership. You can read all the NFL Edge write-ups. Check us out. We've got the Bink machine. Our optimizer is really cool, really fun to toy around with. I am not an optimizer guy, but I have been getting into it. Very easy to use. Very, if you're an MME guy or even single entry 3-max guy, and you want to build, see different builds and kind of choose from there and then adjust from it. It's just very valuable and really cool to toy around with. So a lot of great stuff going on the site. Our Binks channel has been popping the last couple of weeks, so we will look to continue that this week. Thank you again. We will see you in week 5 with our tournament winning lineup reviews. Right, Maximus?
Absolutely. Good luck, everyone.
All right. See ya.
1 week season.